Today is September the 18th, 2004. We're at the 12th Armored Museum in Abilene, Texas. My name is Charla Henson. I'm interviewing Renee Boland, who is the wife of a 12th Armored Division veteran. Thank you for coming today. Tell me your whole name and where you were born and your parents' name.
Well, my name is Irene, but everyone calls me Renee. And I was born in Pennsylvania and lived there until Joe and I got married.
What were your parents' name and what did they do?
Okay. My father was a river boatman, and his name was John Shockley. And my mother's name was Elizabeth, and she died when I was 6 years old. And then I had a stepmother named Ada. And she put food on the table, but she was not a hands-on person, you know. So I got my loving from my older sister, and from my friends' mothers. And so
were they immigrants to America, or they?
No, they came from Ohio.
Okay.
Marietta, Ohio. They were all from, and we lived in Pennsylvania all that time.
Okay. Tell me about your schooling.
I started to school in a little town of New Kensington, and I went there for 6 years, and then we moved to Blawnox, Pennsylvania, where they had a four-room school. I went there in 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, and those 3 rooms were all in one. And then I went to high school in Aspinwall, Pennsylvania, and I went 4 years of high school, graduated, and the next year Joe and I were married.
Okay. Tell me the first time you ever saw Joe in your dating years.
Well, I went to see my sister, who lived in another town, and he came to see his friend, who was my sister's son.
What was he doing? Where was he living?
He was living in New Kensington, and I was in Blawnox, and we met halfway. And we were both riding our bikes, and I guess I was teasing him, so he picked up a tomato and threw it at me and hit me on the butt. And I looked at him and I said, "I'll get you for that." And so a year later we were married.
Okay. How did y'all do a long distance courtship?
Well, there were buses, and he would come down on the bus in the evening.
Was he a student?
He was working by that time. He was 21, I was 18 and a half. And he would come down on the bus, and we would go walking or to a movie or something like that. And then he would go back home on the 10 o'clock bus.
What are some things that stand out during that time, your dating years? 1 year, was it 1 year?
Yes.
I dated 1 year.
Yeah.
Now.
Well, the way I knew that I was really meant for him, I was still in school, and I went to our baccalaureate, and he had come down and he said, "Well, I'll see you after that." Well, when I went to school for baccalaureate, this fella who I really wanted a date with asked me to go out and play miniature golf with a bunch of the other students, and I said, "Oh yeah," not even thinking about it. I thought, well, Joe will get tired and he'll go home, you know. So we were going up through Blawnox, and he was standing there on the corner, and my heart went flip-flop, and I knew that I shouldn't have been there.
Okay. And tell me about your wedding.
Well, we just had a small wedding. I had a suit. It was blue, and I had a picture, they called them picture hats in those days, and I wore that. And we went to Springdale, which was halfway between his town and mine, and we were married in the Presbyterian church. And Joe had said, before he went to the Army, he said, "Someday I'd like to marry you in the Catholic Church." He was Catholic, but he was not a practicing Catholic. So we got married there, and then went back home to Blawnox, where my stepmother had a chicken dinner for his family and mine, and it was just very small. And then we went home to New Kensington, where we had a flat on the 3rd floor. Had to go up 3 flights to, and it was just 2 rooms, a bedroom and kitchen. And that was our honeymoon, because we didn't have that much money in those days.
What was he doing at this time?
He worked at a place called the Arnold Glass Shop, where they did window glasses, and he was a box shop. He worked in the box shop. He made boxes to put the glass in.
Did you go to work at that time, or did you stay?
No, I didn't. He said he didn't want me to work right away.
Was that something that was sort of normal in those days?
I think so, because it seemed like you worked until you got married, and then the companies didn't want you to work when you were married.
So there was kind of a ban on...
Yeah, married women. They wanted the younger ones, I guess, right out of high school.
How long did you live there, and how did Joe get into the Army?
Well, he was drafted into the Army and went in we were married in April, and he was drafted in September. So I went back to live with my family in Blawnox, and he got on the train right there at New Kensington and waved goodbye, and that was it.
Tell me about the day that you found out that he was going to be, that he was called up.
I guess it was, he got home from work, and there was I guess it was a letter, and it says, "I want you," or one of those, you know. And so we sort of had a meal together, and probably I cried.
So where did he go? Where did he go to basic training?
He went to Camp Campbell, Kentucky. And a few months later, after he got established, he sent for me, and I could go to Abilene, or to Hopkinsville, Kentucky, which wasn't very nice. Hopkinsville, Kentucky had a lot of bugs, roaches, and the people there were not very nice to the soldiers. They would rent you a loft for the night, but they were getting more money renting by the day than they were renting by the week. So I had met a friend from Wisconsin who was the wife of a friend of Joe's, and we, during the day, would go and look for a place to stay that night, and then we sometimes would meet them in the evening, and they would have to go back to camp, and we would go up in our little loft and go to sleep and get up the next morning and pack our little bag and go on to the next place that said for rent. It was very hard.
How long did you do this?
I think we were there just a couple months, and then the guys were going out on bivouac, so they couldn't come anymore, so we went, well, Marie and I did find a small house. It had 3 bedrooms and a kitchen, and we had another friend, I forget her name now, but the 3 of us slept there and cooked in the kitchen, and the guys would come in and they could stay sometimes at night on the weekends. So when they decided that they were going on bivouac, we had to go home at that time. And I was glad, because at night you could hear the roaches running across the floor. Yeah, that's how bad they were.
So you didn't work. Didn't work in Kentucky.
No,
you just waited from day to day, waiting for him to come home,
mm-hmm.
if he could.
So I went back home and lived until he was transferred to Abilene. And after he was in Abilene a while, he found a place for me to stay. And the people in Abilene were much nicer, and they would rent you by the month or as long as you were going to be there.
Do you remember where you lived?
You know, I can't remember the street. I remember, and I can't remember the name of the people anymore. I remember it was a nice family, and husband and wife and a little girl who had her hand never developed below the elbow, so you could see her fingers were right there. But she was the sweetest little red-headed girl. She was about 4. And they were very nice people, and you could cook in the kitchen. And that's where I stayed all the time I was there.
And so Joe stayed out at base. How often did he get to come back in? Or did he get to live at home?
Yes, usually on the weekend they came there. And I remember when I was there during Thanksgiving, and we were all the wives were invited out to the base at Thanksgiving time. And so we ate Thanksgiving dinner at the base.
Can you describe that day for us at Camp Barkley?
Well, we all went on the bus, and it was just one big room, like a big restaurant, and the long tables and benches, and all the guys were really friendly. And they had another room where they played ping pong, so we played ping pong with the guys, and they were all the guys were wonderful. And the food was delicious. We had turkey and stuffing and all the things that you would have at home.
Did you get to participate much in what was going on out there, like the USO or the USO in town, or did y'all kind of
No, I didn't.
Okay. Did you have much, besides the family, did you feel like a part of the city of Abilene, or?
Not really. I had a few friends who I spent the day with. We would walk around town and just do things like that.
Okay. At this point, did they have food rations and things like this? Had it already gone into effect?
Oh yeah.
Okay. What did you receive?
Do you know, I really can't remember those things. I guess I've wiped half of it out of my mind, because those were not the pleasantest days.
Yeah. Was it, do you remember the day you found out that he would be leaving and going overseas?
He had told me that he came into town and said that he would be leaving, and he couldn't, I had to go home the next day. So I got a bus trip and went back home to Pennsylvania.
I guess there were a lot of women on the bus.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Buses and trains. And
what battalion is he in? Was he in?
He was in the 12th Armored Division, 493rd Field Artillery Battalion, and he was a forward observer, where he went ahead in a jeep, and then he would tell the other guys behind him by radio where to shoot the cannon, whatever they were shooting.
Pretty dangerous position. Did you know what he was doing?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
How did you, okay, you got back home, was it
probably
September?
the next year,
okay.
1943 probably, and he went overseas.
Okay. So what did you do when you went back home? Did you get a job?
Well, I went and I got a job at a steel mill in the office, and I lived with my parents.
Had it changed, the attitudes about women in work, had it changed since the war had come on?
I guess so, because there were a lot of women working then. I was lucky enough to get an office job. I didn't have to be Rosie the Riveter, although those were the girls who really helped out in the war, I would say.
Yeah. Were there women working in the steel mill?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Ran the furnaces and
mm-hmm.
What was that like, or did you have much contact with
No,
them?
I didn't. I just had most contact with the office people.
Yeah. So when was the first time you received notice back, a letter back, and knew where he was?
Well, they had what they called email. They were small, I guess they were photostats of letters, and probably took a month before I knew where he was, and he was in Germany, and he was captured. He was a prisoner of war. I guess he was a prisoner of war for 5 or 6 months. And it was the name of the prison camp was Stalag 13. And he could write there. The Red Cross enabled them to write these emails. And when he would write, if he wanted to tell me something that he wasn't supposed to say, he would tell it like in story form. He would say, "Jack did this today," and then it would get through.
Wow. What was that? How long did you? Was there a time a time that you did not know if he was missing in action?
Yes, I got a telegram at work, and it said missing in action. But and then it was, I imagine, a month later that I got word that he was in the prison camp. When I got that telegram, I had a friend who lived in Aspinwall, and we both went on the bus down to her mother's place, and her mother was very religious. She was a Catholic, and so we went upstairs and lit a candle for Joe. And he had promised me before he went overseas that he would be back. And I had no qualms that he would not return.
It was a hard time.
It was hard. Mm-hmm.
Can you talk about what it felt like, or would you rather not go there?
I would just go to work every day, and I had a lot of friends who were very helpful, and we just went on from day to day and kept writing letters and hoping that he would get one to me. And he did. He wrote this one letter, and he said Jack had had enough of the Hun camp, and they went out to get firewood, and he went off and escaped. And he went to he went on the road and hid, and came to a farmer's barn, and went into the barn. He thought he could get milk from a cow, and he found a small can and milked the cow, and he was just going to drink it when he heard the farmer coming. So he scrambled up into the hayloft with his can of milk, and the farmer came out in and looked right up to the hayloft because the can had a hole in the bottom. So he told Joe, he said, I wouldn't turn you in, but if I didn't, they would come after me. So he had to turn him in, and he went back to Stalag 13. They did not torture him or harm him in any way. But that was one of the letters that I sent to the museum. So it should be in there someday.
How many letters did you get from him, do you know?
Probably not more than half a dozen all the time that he was in the prison camp. He was there, like I said, 6 months before they were released by the Americans. And the day that he was released, he said they were all loaded into trucks, and he was fortunate enough to be the one to run up the American flag. And he said that was the proudest day of his life.
How did, as your spouse, how did his war experiences, maybe mostly the prisoner of war, how did that affect his life? How did it change him?
I think it made him more quiet. He never, when he came home, he never wanted to talk about it. And unless, except when we started going to the reunions, then he would sit and, but he even didn't talk much. He more listened to the guys, and the guys always talked about the funny things that happened to them more than the bad things. But he wrote another funny story about when they were on the march, and they would save their tea. They got tea every day, and tea leaves that they brewed their tea with. And he said they would take the old tea and put it underneath the bad ones, and then save it. And when they put the new with the old, and then still get some of the good out of it. So this one day they stopped, there was a farmer lady who came along the road, and she had eggs, and they said that they would trade her tea for eggs. Well, she only wanted to give them each one. He had a friend who he did this tea thing with, and she said she would give them each one egg for their can of tea. And so they traded. And as they went on their way, he said to his friend, she'll be surprised when she gets to the bottom of the tea, because it would be the old tea. So they thought that was a good joke on her.
Well, now, when they were they on a work detail, or?
They marched them from one place to another, and then they ended up in this Stalag 13, and that's where he was released.
Was it the English that freed them? Or?
No, it was Americans.
It was Americans. Mm-hmm. Has he told you about what it was like? How did it happen? How did they realize that this was going to happen?
How was he captured?
How he's captured, and then also how he's released.
Well, he was, like I said, a forward observer, and he was in a foxhole, and he was hit by a mortar shell, and he had his helmet on, thank goodness, but he was blinded for a day. He didn't know where he was, and they would lead him around, and he finally got his sight back. And then they were on a march to these different camps, and he was into Stalag 13. They slept on the ground on burlap sacks or whatever they had, and he said the Germans didn't harm them, but because I guess the Germans were just guys like our guys, you know, that they were just doing what they had to do. And they gave them as much food as they could, but they didn't have that much food themselves. So they would say, we're going to have potato soup today, and they would take a potato and dip it in the water and dip it back out, and that was their potato soup. He lost 50 pounds while he was in there for 6 months before he was released.
How did they find out that they were going to get released? Was it just...
Well, the soldiers came and surrounded the camp, and the Germans gave in.
Did he know anyone, did he go in, was he captured with anybody he knew, or were the people that went with him from different...
No, he was not captured with anybody that he knew, but he he met a friend there who was in the 12th Armored, and so they became friends, and they met afterwards at the reunions every year.
Do you remember who that is, the name?
His name was Felix Kolakowski. Okay. He was a real tall guy.
Tell me what it was like surviving just day-to-day stuff like the rations, or do you remember much about living at home and how your family, gasoline,
Well,
tires.
my father worked on the WPA. It was called in those days. It was Workmen's. Let me think. I can't remember what
Was it Workers' Projects?
Workers' Project Association,
Yeah.
or something like that. And we were fortunate enough to have a little more than some people had. At least he had a job, and I would get my check from the government every month. And I still got it while he was a prisoner of war.
Was it very, was life pretty Spartan? Was it pretty?
Yeah, my stepmother, she was a farm lady from the farm, and she knew how to make things stretch. So we had enough to eat. And my father would go down to we lived near a river, and he would go down in the mornings and catch fish. So we had the fish to eat. They were catfish. And I never liked them.
And still don't, huh?
But I ate a little anyhow.
So when did you find out that he was going to come home?
I got a telegram saying that they had found him and he was released, and I can't remember what month that was, but he called me from Pittsburgh. He had gotten that far, and he called me at work from Pittsburgh, and I ran up the hill and met him at the top of the hill. He was on the bus, and he jumped off the bus, and we walked home to my dad's house.
A wonderful day.
Oh, yes.
How long was he in the hospital before he came home?
No, he came home, and then he was sent to North Carolina to a rehabilitation center after that, and I was allowed to go with him.
What was his condition?
He was very thin. He had been a muscular person before that, but he was a lot thinner and very quiet, very quiet. He just wanted to enjoy being out in the world again.
On his rehabilitation, was that for motor skills or?
No, it was to feed him, and this was in at North Carolina. I can't remember the name of it. It was in my head, but anyhow, somewhere in North Carolina they had this big rehabilitation camp, and they had all kinds of activities for him to do, and trips that we could take up into the mountains on day trips, and played miniature golf, and just enjoyed ourselves. That was my honeymoon. That's what we always said.
Do you think he ever fully recovered from all of that, or has that made him a different person?
I think just being there 6 months, if he had been there a couple of years, it might have affected him. But one way it did affect him, I remember when we were at his mother's, we went to see his mother who lived in Maryland. And we went to see a movie, and it was a war movie. And this airplane was strafing, and he dove under the seat. And that's how it affected him. And that was probably 6 months after he came home.
Does he kind of steer clear of those kinds of things
yes,
even now?
Yes, we didn't go to see too many movies like that.
When he recovered, tell me the rest of y'all's life together.
Well, we went back to New Kensington, and we bought a little house on the GI Bill, And he came home in 1945, and in 1946 our first son was born in April. And we had 4 boys within 7 years. And then he got his job back at the glass house, and while he was working, he would work at night and go to school during the day so that he could get, and that was on the GI Bill also, so that he could get a better job. And he got this job at Mine Safety Appliances in Pittsburgh, and he worked on instruments that measured gas in mines and that type of thing. But it was a good job.
So would he be considered a miner or just a...
No, engineer.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Now, did he go through the college? He got finished.
He went to
college?
school for 9 months, I believe, before he got this other job. But he did very well in it. He was at the top of his class. And they even took his picture and had it in magazines that for Pentech was the name of the school that he went to.
So did he retire with that same company? Or?
Yes, he did. He worked for them until he was 63. And by that time we had 7 children. We had bought another house in New Kensington, and we had 4 boys. And then 6 years later, when the youngest of the 4 boys went to school, we had a girl and a boy and a girl within 4 years. So we had 7 kids, and it was like having 2 families.
Y'all spent a long time raising a family.
Yes. Now they're all grown up and married, and they're all good kids. They worked hard, and we made them go out and do for themselves. They were not spoiled kids, but they had a lot of fun.
If you were to look back, and is there anything that you and your husband Joe, is there anything that you can be grateful for through all those years?
Oh, grateful that he came through the war, and without any mental or physical handicaps. And he got strong again, and he played baseball and played with the kids, and he was a good father.
What has the association done for y'all through the years? That
well,
relationship?
It's we started when I guess they were 10 years into the association, and they had the reunion in Pittsburgh, and his friends called him and said, "Come on down to Pittsburgh." So we went one night, and from then on we went to most of the reunions, and they were in different, they would be in different cities or different parts of the country every year. But through the association we've met some wonderful people and visited them in their homes, and he really stuck with the one that he met first when he first went in the Army. His name was Melroy Ferrand, and he was from Wisconsin. And his wife is the one that I met in Hopkinsville, Kentucky, and we've stayed friends all these years.
That's a blessing in itself.
It is.
Yeah.
Yes, it was.
If you were to, if someone were to get this tape in 50 years, you being the wife of a 12th Armored Division or person, or something that you would want to leave people, what would you say?
I would say be strong in your faith. Teach your children to do what's right, and make lots of good friends.
That is great. Thank you. I appreciate it so much. Okay. Yeah. Thank you.